And now I'm delighted to welcome our panel of some very thoughtful voices on energy access and reliability. I'm joined by Dr. Benjamin Chavis Jr., a prominent civil rights leader and president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We love the Publishers Association, so thank you, Ben. Jane Nakano, senior fellow in the Energy Security and Climate Change Program at the Center for Strategic and International Study. She is one of the smartest people I know in the international energy policy scene. So glad to have Jane with us. And finally, my friend Will Marshall, the president and founder of the Progressive Policy Institute. He's also the lead guitarist in a popular band here, and just, you know, the least dogmatic person I know. Let me just start, Ben, let me just ask you and start to give us a picture. You really invented the term environmental racism. And right now, yes, when you look at the divides hitting this country, you look at the divides over, race and inequality, you look at the impact of COVID-19, you look at the level of unemployment and the economic challenge. There's a lot going on in this country. And so these divides, vulnerable communities that have been, zoned out, you see it so vividly today, and you were calling the shots on this years ago. So can you give us an update on what you see in the environmental racist picture today?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having this panel. Salute the Hill for taking this initiative. I would just say that I see today's panel as a beginning discussion. We need to continue it, and we thank the American Petroleum Institute for sponsoring it. Quick, short answer to the question. Environmental racism is still alive and well in America, but I would say we are making some progress. At least now we know sometimes you can't solve a problem if you don't admit that the problem exists. Back in the early 1980s, when I first coined the term environmental racism, there was a dispute, denial, but now everybody knows with the growing environmental justice movement, which involves people of color communities, not only across the United States, but throughout the world. It's a global movement now to make sure that people of color are not left out of environmental decision-making. And as we talk about energy, renewable energy, access to energy, reliability, certainly we want to make sure that African Americans, Latinx, Asian Americans, Native Americans, people of all colors, of all races are involved in those discussions. But let me just say, as I listened to Congressman Gonzalez in the early part of the program talk about the advances that the United States has made, the now export of natural gas, the thing that I'm concerned about and what I want to hear what the other panelists feel was that the workforce development is going to change. I not only represent the National Newspaper Publishers Association that represent the Black press, but also work strategically with the National Association of Hispanic Publications, our Latino brothers and sisters, also in the energy field. And we think there's a great opportunity. The workforce is going to change. It is changing. And we want to make sure that persons of color are working in natural gas or working in the oil and gas industry as it innovates, as it changes, as it becomes a global exporter, particularly of natural gas. To me, you measure progress not only about the impact of energy, the impact of the environment, of climate change on our communities, but you also measure progress of do we practice diversity and inclusion in the public policy making? And that's where I see some real opportunities for us to grow and learn together.
Ben, before I jump to Will and Jane on that, I want to ask you because, sometimes I look at America as a great show and tell platform. Somebody innovates, gets it right over here, someone gets it wrong over there. And sometimes we talk things in such a sterile macro way. Are there any communities that have done, workforce development, that have looked at energy inclusion, that have looked at, changing and blurring some of these lines you've written about, that you think have gotten it right, that are useful to hold up as an example for others to see?
Yeah, in Texas, Texas is a state now. It's no longer a blue state or a red state. It's a purple state where people are learning how, where Congressman Gonzalez is from, learning how to make sure that workforce diversity practices diversity and inclusion. In my home state of North Carolina, I'm seeing it also where people now are approaching the future of the energy sector much more inclusively. But I think we have to do our homework. We got to keep pressing the course. I think my fellow panelists would agree that these are issues that we all have to weigh in on with integrity, with truth. There's one thing about collecting data. We've got to make sure that after the data is collected, that you have the right interpretation of the data. And I think that we do need to do some more primary research about how the workforce development is innovating, is being more inclusive. And if you look at the school systems, look at colleges and universities, even community colleges, how we're preparing for the next workforce development. And now we have this pandemic. I'm very concerned that a lot of potential workers are being displaced because of the pandemic. But also, even in the midst of this pandemic, I think there are opportunities if we articulate them right. It's interesting that when everybody saw that awful, tragic video of George Floyd being murdered in Minneapolis, it kind of shocked us to have another discussion about race, another discussion about diversity and inclusion. And I'm so pleased that at least I know in the energy sector, a lot of the major energy companies now, we're having more than a discussion. I think I see some real progress being made.
Thank you. Will, let me jump to you for a second, and then we're going to go global with Jane. But I'm going to ask you, I've read over the many years, not to age you, but many Progressive Policy Institute energy reports. And I'm just interested in, given what you've tried to advise and counsel about energy transitions and about how to get the right mix in the country, what grade would you give the nation right now?
Well, it's a tough one, Steve. The problem is we're just deeply polarized on the basic factual questions. We have a breakdown of consensus in the country. 10 or 15 years ago, if you had asked me that question, I could have seen more clearly a path toward a sensible, balanced energy policy that reduces our greenhouse gas emissions, but make sure we have ample, affordable energy for everybody, and that takes advantage of the shale boom that America has experienced in the last 15 years in terms of exports and in the support of trade and American foreign policy. But the problem is that here at home, we just have this dissensus. It's a breakdown. And, when half, or let's say 44% of the country doesn't believe there's even a climate problem that needs to be solved, it's really hard to get a pragmatic discussion going about how you get to where you need to be, which is really a shame. And if I could make this one point, Steve, we've done this actually in the Obama-Biden years in 2008 to 2016. We saw greenhouse gas emissions decline in this country by 10%. At the same time that the economy grew by 14%. So what we saw is a decoupling of growth and carbon emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions. So we know it can be done, and it doesn't require sort of this kind of tong war we're fighting now in order to get back to a situation where we can balance growth with our climate needs and carbon reduction obligations and commitment without having this kind of tribal warfare. But sadly, we seem to be mired in it, at least through the duration of this election.
Well, I want to not let you go yet, but I think one of the questions you have is, how do you, I get that there's no consensus, but what are the equities you think can be put forward? And I have to say that we sort of got taunted right before this program happened. Interior Secretary David Bernhardt has said, that they're going to begin making available more oil exploration development leases in the Alaskan National Wildlife Refuge. And this, right before the Democratic Convention, has, ignited, folks on all sides of that debate. And I'm just interested in, that's a very third rail issue. It has been. But are we at this point when you have sort of you have a lot of energy, but I think part of the thing I found interesting was that you still have a lot of people in this country that aren't connected in a very sound way. So we both have lots of largesse in energy, and yet we have insufficient provision to even some of our own citizens. I'm just interested in the Will Marshall map. How would you begin to get some of these equities right?
Well, I'm not, I don't have a glib answer to that, but let me point to issues where I think you could build consensus. And right now we have the worst recession since the Great Depression in America, an incredible economic freeze. And one of the things we need to do is to launch a big clean energy investment, infrastructure investment. This is a source of a lot of jobs and good production jobs, as Reverend Chavis was saying, middle-class jobs, sustaining jobs, the kind that we've lost a lot of in this country and that everybody misses and wants to make sure we have more of, so that people that don't have college and education and advanced degrees can make good middle-income jobs. So there's an opportunity for a major investment there and a need for it to put everybody back to work after this pandemic. And I would be more particular still and say that, in electric vehicles, I see a future for a rebound in American manufacturing. If we're smart, if we have public policies that make sure that we do not hand leadership of the electric vehicle industry over to China, which is currently in the lead. So I think that the good news here is that Joe Biden is looking at this opportunity as a jobs picture, right? If you look at Joe Biden's his environmental and climate and energy statement, jobs gets mentioned about twice as often even as climate. Joe Biden sees this as an employment issue, as a rebuilding of the country issue, as a rebuilding of our manufacturing sector and of our infrastructure that supports it. So I think there lies my hope to see a new conversation, perhaps after this election.
Well, that's great. And Jane, I want to give you full runway to discuss the American scene, but I know what I invited you on today was really about the global scene, the global divides that are out there. And we've heard from a number of people today talk about America as an energy superpower today, exporting abroad. And I'm just interested in whether the rest of the world sees America that way as a superpower in energy, or whether we're deluding ourselves.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I think that the U.S. has become a superpower in terms of producer, but we're also significant consumer as well. But the way that we have been able to share our natural gas and also oil wealth with many countries that have had difficulty accessing, whether it's the cost hurdle or it's technical hurdle, I think we're making a lot of contributions. But we also have to remind ourselves that we still have a lot to do in terms of using energy in a smart manner at home. It's certainly an energy access challenge at home, but then also how we keep innovating and making sure that it's not just the oil gas wealth that we share with the world. It's the renewables. It's many other clean energy technologies. So it's an interesting time because it's no longer sort of a producer versus consumer world, right? It's many countries are both fairly significant producers, but then also consumers. Certainly we're one of them, but then also China actually does produce a lot of oil in It's just that they consume much more than what they can produce at home. So they're significant importers as well. So in many ways we are at times where a lot of sort of the economy that we work with, the way that we look at the energy, global energy landscape the past 40 years are, need to be re-examined.
Let me, Ben Chavis a minute ago was asked, made the point about the global divide that we had a responsibility to look on that side as well, and that there are many people, when you kind of look at the global network of how energy passes, we need to be aware of these other divides. And I guess my question to you is China getting that developmental responsibility globally right or wrong? Are they getting it better than we are? Because China is another huge player out in this.
I think China is driven by its own need to keep, its population happy, to be honest with you. But in part of their strategy is to keep innovating and, something like, electric vehicles. But then also they do invest quite a bit in clean energy technologies like solar, like wind, but then also nuclear energy. And to the extent that they are, I guess, open to sharing those technologies as providers or sellers to many countries around the world that have not had easy access to these technologies, but perhaps sort of easier financing. In China's case, China uses a lot of state banking and so the financial institutions to make the financial hurdle lower for these emerging economies. So in many ways, I think China does try to sort of kill a couple birds with one stone, and in a way that we may not be able to really replicate because their system is quite different. It's a very state-driven, top-down system. So in many ways, there is, in my view, quite a bit that we still need to cooperate as far as the ability for us to sort of bend the curve and try to be able to deploy a lot of clean energy technologies. Although, there are a lot of security concerns that are being discussed, and those are completely legitimate concerns that we still have to address. But as far as innovation, they are putting so much money and so much resource behind that there is quite a bit that we can actually benefit from collaboration with one another.
Really appreciate.
Could I just comment on that?
Yeah,
I think
sure.
that China today is the largest single investor in Africa, the largest single by yards, by miles. And they are contributing to the growth of these emerging economies in Africa, particularly in the energy sector. Building hydroelectric plants, solar, wind. They're helping Africa innovate. And I think the United States has to step up to the plate, not to be in competition with China. I think what we need is a global energy strategy where we look after how we, the oneness of humanity. I think that, like here in the United States, we're talking about our domestic divisions. There are also international divisions that I think we need to bridge more. When it comes to energy, when it comes to climate change, these are global issues that require a global strategy. And I think if any country tries to go it alone, it's not in that country's best interest, and certainly it's not in the global community's best interest.
Could I jump in on that?
Yeah, sure. Will, go ahead.
Absolutely agree. And as we heard earlier, there are 1 billion people in the world without any kind of electricity, 3 billion people who live in energy poverty. We can't tell the world that you can't develop. You can't move up the development curve. You can't attain a middle-class lifestyle for the mass of your people. Because if you do that, you're going to be burning a lot of dirty energy and creating a climate problem. I mean, we have to have better answers than that, is what I heard Reverend Chavis say. And that's why a mix of energies, a mix of energy portfolio is going to be absolutely essential. Just for an example, China is selling hundreds of coal-burning plants to Vietnam, to Turkey, to countries all over the world. These countries need energy. They need to develop. But wouldn't it be better if the United States could export some of our, we have a lot of low-cost natural gas now. Wouldn't it be better if we could export our natural gas so that other countries could do what we did, fuel switch, substitute cleaner burning gas for coal in their electricity sectors? That produced, as I mentioned earlier, during the Obama years, really solid environmental gains. And again, this problem cannot be solved on a one-nation basis.
That's right.
If we abolished the fossil fuels tomorrow, which we're not going to do, but if that happened, we would not be solving the global climate challenge, because you have to have everybody rowing in the same direction. So, and you've got to use all the tools at your disposal supply, and not sort of have these religious battles. This fuel good, this fuel bad. From a global perspective, it just doesn't work that way, and that's one of the things I think we often miss in the U.S. debate.
Well, I mean, just before you leave that point, I mean, you've been struggling with others over the soul of the Democratic establishment for a long time, and there are lots of different personalities under that tent. Do you see any prospect that what you just suggested, which means embracing, natural gas, embracing exports, but it's a different form of energy, is something that the left of the Democratic Party can embrace and be part of? Or does it all just need to be a zero-sum game between, those different quadrants in the party?
Well, there's some folks on the left that I think you'll never dissuade from the view that we need to keep gas in the ground and never get it out again. But I think that's, again, Steve, a function of how polarized we are at home. In other words, if we had something, if the Republicans hadn't gotten lined up behind President Trump and taken this view that, climate change is a myth, then I think people on the other side of the spectrum would feel better about a more balanced approach. And, but everything is being presented as, this is not a problem. And so it's mutually radicalizing of the debate. But, we got to remember that production workers, including working class African-American and Latino workers, and including white blue-collar workers, we need to talk to these people. We can't tell them their jobs have to be killed tomorrow night or in 10 years. We need to show them a path, a transition that doesn't require them to bear the brunt of this transition by themselves. So I think, again, I think we're going to have to change our political picture a little bit here, Steve. But when we do that, we may be able to get back toward a conversation which is less zero-sum and polarized and more.
Right.
More taking advantage of all the tools we have in this country.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Ben, I want to take a question we got from our audience, and I apologize if I butcher this name. It's from Uduak Joe Ntuk, who's a state oil and gas supervisor in the state of California. And I'm going to piggyback on this. He asks, how can the industry balance addressing climate change and national economic growth? But I would tie in there racial injustice and what you've been talking about, but try to give people, to some degree, a little bit more of how they can understand the traction of this. What would really move the needle in terms of just knowing there's injustice and division and these imbalance? What are some of the right patterns and habits that we need to have?
Thank you. It's a very good question. I served on the Clinton-Gore transition team for energy. And I later served on President Clinton's the White House Sustainable Development Council. And there was a big debate about what is the definition of sustainable development? Is it environmentalists versus the corporate heads? And we came to an understanding that as long as we polarize and stay divided, we're never going to make the kind of progress. So I think, yes, you can have the energy sector's needs to advance and expand at the same time to recognize and protect the environment. It's not either or. We need economic development, but we also need to protect the environment, to be aware of climate change. There are too many deniers, unfortunately, today, policymakers who deny that climate change is even real. And I think that is going to not only harm the environment, but it's also going to harm the economy. I think the pandemic has shown us that we all have to work together across these lines of division. Whether you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, whether you are in an energy producing state or energy consuming state, we all have to work together to protect the future of the generation that's going to come after us. And we cannot deny the impact of climate change. So I am optimistic from a civil rights perspective and a racial justice. To me, I don't make a distinction between racial justice and environmental justice or healthcare justice. Martin Luther King said that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think that what we are coming together to see is our mutual interests across racial lines, across political lines. And therefore, I think even tonight at the Democratic Convention, former Ohio Governor Kasich, a Republican former governor, is going to speak at the Democratic Convention. And I do know one of his issues is going to be on the energy matter, workforce development, inclusiveness, and diversity. I think that's the wave of the future. It's not to point out how different we are, but what are our common interests, and to discover that we're more alike than we are separate and apart.
Jane, I'm going to give you the final comment here and just ask you that when it comes to this issue, how do I frame it here? I'm going to just sort of wing this. we know that there are major infrastructure deficits, multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure deficits in the United States. We know there's a wobbliness and an unevenness in the provision of some basic goods. Is anybody else around the world getting it better than we are? Have they leapt strategically into a different? Is South Korea better than us? Is Japan better than us? Are there other ways where we could learn? As we think about infrastructure, of doing reliable energy provision better than we're seeing in the United States?
I think we're all in sort of a learning mode, if you will, but I think the Europeans have been looking at this quite closely. Part of this coronavirus-induced economic crisis, one of the lessons to them is to really rebuild their economy in much more resilient manner. So there's quite a bit of lessons learned, but I wouldn't say that there's one country that has all the elements right. I think there's still quite a bit of a room for each country to share its lessons as things are evolving. But, if I may quickly say, I think, without discounting all the sufferings that have happened because of the coronavirus, but this has been sort of a test run, if you will. As my fellow panelists have said, there's great learning opportunity. It's a global, multifaceted challenge that requires the way that we do business, the way we behave for the, greater common good. And so, we really need to come together and really have synergy, generate synergy, not really, be divided over, this today's concern, whether it's the paycheck or access to, but anyways, so in many ways, again, there's no, and this is a great chance for the United States, all of us, to be able to share our lessons, whether it's, not what not to be repeated or what to be replicated, but really great space for us to reestablish our leadership in climate.
Well, what a great discussion. I want to thank all of you. And I think I heard so many things from each of you that I could go out and want to go write op-eds on, or, little pieces on. But particularly what, Ben also said about one way to kind of, give people a stake in what's going on and sort of advance with technology and options and reliability is workforce development. And, that allows us to sort of look at the future as an investment, which I know rings well with both PPI and my friends at CSIS. So Ben Chavis, civil rights, part of the civil rights conscious of this nation, President and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Jane Nakano, Senior Fellow, Energy and Climate Change Program at CSIS. And Will Marshall, founder of the Progressive Policy Institute. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights today.
Thank you. We look forward to continue this discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.